Hells yeah.
Alright. Welcome to another Sunday Superversive live stream, end of the year 2023 in review. It's me, Ben, and Anthony Marquetta. How are you doing today, Anthony?
I am preparing myself for the cheese sausage that is had on New Year's Eve.
Amazing, outstanding. Uh, I know for myself, I'm more of a Wild Wings kind of guy. Uh,
Hmm.
but we'll see how things turn out in the evening. Uh, eh, what a year. Um,
It's a year, all right.
it's certainly a year. I gotta admit, this hasn't been a great year for me, even though in 2022 I moved out. My brother dying and a few other things has kind of put the kibosh on a lot of stuff. I'm happy with what I've done so far with Pinkerton's Ghosts, and we should have some more episodes up soon. But it's one of those things where I don't know. Like I'm not really like I'm where the Lord needs me, and some things have happened that have like proved that somehow. But I can't say I'm happy about it. Uh,
I get you.
that's my year in review there. Uh, Not as great as it probably could have been, but that's all right.
I don't know. We seem to have similar conversations every year, and I feel like in some ways it's the human condition and to be expected. So I don't want to make too big a deal of it where people, it's something that I heard was kind of a common wisdom of somebody pointing out that like the fact that you're not happy in a larger, uh sense is unsurprising, to be expected, and not abnormal because we are not
Uh,
made for this world. So we would not expect to be happy all the time or even all that often in right like
yeah,
there's the joy of the saints and things like that. Yeah.
yep,
But even that sort of that
trite.
is a supernatural type of joy, right? And you need
Yes,
to get to a certain state in your spiritual life to reach that point. Notably, it's about changing yourself and not the world around you,
yep.
right?
And this
And
it's mostly
most people aren't there.
yeah,
And if you're not there, there is a certain wisdom in just going like, well, I'm not super happy, but also like I'm not where I'm not in the world I'm meant to be in yet. And
yep,
that's a sign that I need to grow in my spiritual life. And that is what it is.
yeah.
What were you going to say, Ben?
Not much. Not much at all.
I get you. Yeah, because, I always feel like, but again, I say this and then I go, but then who doesn't feel like this? Like every year I'm in some sort of holding pattern
Yeah.
where I never progress as much as I want to. And I always go like, okay, I feel like that
There's
more could or should have happened that didn't.
yeah,
But then it's like, but then doesn't everybody feel like that? Like it's not really
yeah.
special, you know?
There's a certain amount to it that's like, yeah, most people are like this. But also there's a certain amount of events out of our control lead to the misery of the mind and soul at the moment, even if in the long term of things, it's not so bad. Um, like concerning the death
Yeah,
of my
there's
brother, it's like, yeah, no, he went to heaven. We're very sure about that. You know, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, but feeling it ain't great. Colors the
mm,
year, and so
of
even
course, yeah.
even though like I feel
I
like I've written my best stories, it still feels a bit hollow than it should.
certainly. And yeah, I don't know. People are like, oh, I had a great year, I had a bad year, whatever. It's like in the end, I always try and give this high view Catholic sort of perspective that's like when we die, none of it's going to end up mattering, right? Like
Yeah,
it will and it won't. Or put in another way, if we go to heaven, then all of it will have mattered in ways we cannot possibly understand. If we go to hell, then none of it will have mattered.
Yeah.
Uh, so there's not much sense worrying about it either way, right? Like,
Yep.
I think that's a better way of putting it than, oh, either way, none of it will matter. It's more like if you go, that's trying to remember. I think I want to say Saint Teresa of Lisieux, but I might be wrong. There was a saint who said something like that. That basically that when you look back, you realize that all of it was a heaven or all of it was a hell,
Yeah.
right? Uh, and I think that there is a lot of wisdom there, right?
Yep.
Now, I have been reading the Divine Comedy recently. So the thing about the Divine Comedy is that everybody in America, Inferno is the most famous one. This isn't actually as true internationally. It's somewhat true, just because it's the first one.
Yeah.
So like it's the one people get to before any of the others for no other reason than that. But in America, especially, there's like a big emphasis on Inferno. Purgatorio is often almost forgotten that even exists, and then Paradiso is just looked at as a like this philosophical treatise. There's very little drama there. In reality, from what I've heard, I'm in the middle of reading it, so I can't confirm myself yet. But from what I have heard from people who have read the entire thing, is that the story gets increasingly better as it goes on. Like I have heard that Purgatorio was better than Inferno and Paradiso was better than Purgatorio, from
Yeah.
people who have actually read the entire thing, and I can believe that. Now, but it's interesting reading Inferno, and it reminds me of something John C. Wright said that they asked him. I remember him, he was answering the question of what a Catholic version of Pilgrim's Progress would look like. 'Cause Pilgrim's Progress, very interesting book. It's like, an idea of what the Christian journey would look like from the perspective of, what was he, a Puritan? I could be wrong about
Yes.
this. Yeah, from a Puritan. And in that sense, it has a lot of wisdom in it, and some stuff that I would disagree with, but overall, I think it's a wise book. Uh, but they asked John C. Wright about like what a Catholic version of that would look like, and he goes, "It would look like Dante's Inferno. It
Yep.
would look like the Divine Comedy." Uh, and he's right. When you read the Dante's Inferno, what you are struck by is how everything is an allegory. Like
Yeah.
absolutely everything. Every moment, every line, everything is a stand-in for something else.
Yep.
And it's layers on layers on layers of this in a way that is different than like Pilgrim's Progress, where you go, Christian represents all Christians. Where it's like, well, what does Dante represent? Well, he represents all Christians. He also represents poets. He also represents people like there's layers of this going down, right?
There, I will defend Pilgrim's Progress here and say that there's more than just Christian is the Christian man. And I mean
That's
he's
fair. I'm not trying to dunk on Pilgrim's
yeah
Progress. That wasn't really the goal. Yeah, and I'm certainly willing to concede that point. I think there's a lot of wisdom in Pilgrim's Progress for sure.
yeah
Uh,
because it's I've always felt that there's a certain spiritual nature to uh, so I view them like to be very clear here. I've read Pilgrim's Progress. I haven't finished. I haven't really read even uh, the Divine Comedy,
Divine Comedy.
but it's like there's layers to these things. Like this is an end of year stream, and we're talking about something we haven't really talked about all year probably. But the layer is that the things we do resonate in the spiritual world as much as they resonate in the physical world. Um, and it's difficult to comprehend that because in certain situations where we deal with other people, we bring forth either a bit of heaven or a bit of hell. Uh, and it is not as simple as did you do good to somebody or did you do evil to somebody. It's much more nuanced. There's some people who like to go on and on about, oh, it's the little things that matter, and then they'll, I don't know, have the wackiest political perspective you've ever heard. Anarcho-communist something something something, but in Bolivia. Uh, and it's like, okay, we see your works there, we know what you are. But what about, the Christian life and the Christian ideas? It's to them anathema, and they hate it. They hate the idea of it. As an example, I can't remember if I told this story already, but I was standing at the door at the bar I bounce at, and this one guy saw me reading a book on Herodotus, and we spoke to each other. And I spent the time witnessing to him, and I got the gospel to him several times. And he described why he was a Norse pagan, specifically a worshiper of the goddess of death, Hel, to the point where he speaks to her in cemeteries. Not that
Interesting.
she responds back all the time, but she did once. Uh, and He described a time when he was at camp, uh, and he was searching for God and for meaning in the stars and stuff like that. And he saw a woman walking through the forest. He felt an urge to follow her, so he did, and she brought him to a rotting carcass. Not a human one, just some random animal. And he took it as a sign that he should worship death. His parents, rather than say that is the wackiest, most demonic thing I've ever heard in my life, you are absolutely not going to worship death because some random person brought you to a carcass. This is clear demonic activity. Uh, they said, okay, well, if you don't want to be a Christian, here's a Quran and here's a Torah and here's a, Bible, and you are going to, study them so that you can give a proper answer. And his grandparents are like, no, we're Christian, dude. Maybe don't do that. But,
Hmm.
uh, like the nature of spiritual warfare is always deeper than what we ourselves can see or interact with, and many time it takes people who are very spiritually aware to even understand that life is like Dante's Inferno and Pilgrim's Progress. We are not
Yes.
simply a man walking through his Protestant lifestyle, working hard and eschewing papacy, but rather I deal with constant spiritual dangers. In reality, even though you might say, well, that's clearly a Catholic analog and things like Pilgrim's Progress, I would even say that it's more about the nature of structured religion in the sense of the ritual is more important than the faith than it is, the dangers of whoever happens to be on the seat of Peter in this day or whatever. Um, what's the meme? You can develop a medieval sort of piousness by having no idea what the seat of
Yeah, what the Pope in Rome is doing.
right.
Uh,
But it's like the life we live in, has
yes,
that
and
allegorical
that's
power.
that's a bit of what I was trying to get at in a very roundabout way and meandering way, which is in the spirit of Dante. Uh, so the thing is that once you read the Divine Comedy, what you realize that's not is that the allegory isn't just an allegory of going through the inferno to reach heaven. It's an allegory about going through life.
Yes.
It starts off with Dante wants to make sees the light at the top of the mountain, and he wants to just go there, but it's being guarded by three wild beasts that represent the sins, right?
Yes.
So he can't go directly there. The only way for him to get there is to pass through the inferno, right?
Yep.
Climb the mountain of Purgatorio, and only then can he reach Paradiso, which Dante correctly remembers is also hierarchical, which is often
Yep.
forgotten, but is very explicit in the Bible. Uh,
Oh yeah.
yeah, they are extremely clear that people will have different experiences of heaven, some greater and some lesser. Uh, Granted, there is a reason that most people don't dwell on this, which is like, well, you're still in heaven, like
Yeah. Like, oh
and
no, I'm not in the forefront of the heavenly choir singing, praises to God
yeah,
for all eternity. I am merely, 5 steps back, or
yeah.
whatever. It's like, oh.
And yeah, it is true though that they
Yes.
do make a point of saying that there's a hierarchy in heaven as well, uh,
Yes.
which Dante remembers,
Yeah.
and
No, and it's not
some of the
something.
funniest.
Sorry.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's
Finish what
not
you were saying.
something Protestants dwell on, but when we do talk about it, we tend to describe it like different jobs, which is, of course, the appropriate Protestant remark for such things. You
It's
know,
the only Protestant way. Uh, yeah,
work
no,
in
I get it.
heaven, it
Uh,
really is heaven.
yeah, some of the funniest scenes in Divine Comedy are like, first, of course, Dante. The Divine Comedy is kind of interesting because people, I remember Wendigoon was not a huge fan of Inferno, and I think he was being, in my opinion, I mentioned this to you at the time. I thought he was being a little bit unfair to it, but I sort of get
Yes,
it because I thought he was being a little bit unfair, but I also get it. And the reason that I get, by the way, he loved Purgatorio and Paradiso. Like he was
yes,
much more effusive in his praise of them. But I get it in the sense that Dante's character arc, if you can say he has one in Inferno, is to get more callous and less I don't know how to put it. Yeah, to get more callous towards the souls in hell and to have less pity for them, right? I was gonna
yes,
say less pitiable, but that would be wrong. That's the wrong use of the adjective. Uh to So he has to get less pity and be more callous towards the souls of the inferno. And Wendigoon, I don't really think that's a problem with Dante so much as it's an inherent problem in portraying because how we're supposed to react to the souls in hell is a theological problem that's never really been solved. Thank you. I was just brought food. uh, it's a theological problem that's never really been solved. How we're supposed to react to the souls in hell, right? Uh,
yep,
and because it doesn't, there's no real obvious answer. Like the
yeah,
Thomistic answer, or the traditional one anyway, has always been like Thomas points out that you should take some joy in, the suffering of people who deserve it, right?
right,
And this seems very, very callous to us, understandably so, right?
yes,
And especially because it's really not an appropriate way for us to think in the here and now, you know, uh, on Earth. Like that's not the way that we should be thinking when people still have a chance of being saved, which they do when they're alive, right?
yes,
But when they don't, then it's like, okay, well, then they're not going to repent. They hate God. They deserve what they get. And you really have no reason to be upset about it.
yep,
This is a technically true and logically accurate and perfectly sound answer that is profoundly unsatisfying. Uh, nobody really likes that answer, so people keep kind of trying to find ways around it. This was a theological problem that Dante faced in the Inferno, and I think it's what Wendigoon sensed as not being very satisfying.
yeah,
Because I think that Dante's answer to, well, how should you react, is a perfectly sound one theoretically, right? Like
yeah,
if you were to think of a solution, and that is a solution that makes sense to me of going, well, if you're part of the saved, then the damned are people who have made themselves your enemies, right? So
yep,
there is really no reason to pity them. True,
yeah,
but it's not very fun to read about, I guess.
yes,
And this is why like Purgatorio is in some ways the most compelling of the three in a narrative sense, because Purgatorio is, of course, in Paradiso and in Inferno. In both senses, the struggle is actually over, right?
yes,
Those in Inferno have struggled and failed. And those in Paradiso have struggled and succeeded with the help of God, maybe, right? Or God succeeded and they like whatever, however you want to put it, nuance it
yes,
however you'd like, right? But the struggle is over. In Purgatorio, that is essentially a story that is all about the struggle. And sure, it's an inevitably successful struggle,
yes,
right? That's the point of the Purgatorio, but it's still a struggle, right? There's
yes,
still fighting you need to do. One of the most amusing moments of the Divine Comedy to me is when Dante is entering the outskirts of Purgatorio, and it's like you've left Inferno. This is now Purgatorio. You're not even at the mountain yet, and he sees at like the very edge of the mountain one of his friends, and uh, and he is like intensely relieved to see him there. It's like I'm gonna be honest, it was kind of touch and go for a while there. Uh, it was like, wow, I didn't think you'd make it, to be honest with you. And he's like, yeah, me neither. Uh, but so it's pretty amusing. Uh, so what I was trying to get at with it is that's the spiritual life, right? You need to pass through,
Yep.
all of our sins, all of our imperfections, and then once you acknowledge all of them, this is the inferno, right? You acknowledge your brokenness and sinfulness. You need to struggle and claw your way. And sure, now that you have done that work of saying that, like, I reject my sinful self, then good, God is going to help you. You're going to make it, but that doesn't mean it's going to be easy,
Yep.
right? That doesn't mean that everything, it all just stops. Like the Christian man, we all know Catholic, Protestant, however you want to nuance it in terms of, once saved salvation theology, but we all know people who are like, that's a person who, in my judgment, I'm not God, but right, in my
Yes.
judgment, I think they will probably be saved when they die, right? Like, I think that God is, they are the sort of person, and yet I also happen to know that they are somebody who is deeply flawed, right? Uh,
Yes.
we all know people like that but they're people who struggle. They're people who work on themselves, who go on the journey. Hopefully, we're all like that ourselves.
Yes.
We can't and shouldn't judge ourselves in that way. That's not our place. Uh, but that's the goal, right?
Yep.
And then the ultimate goal is to become a saint. And most of us, very, very few people, some people do end up reaching that state of the spiritual life on earth. Most people won't. Uh,
Yep.
and that includes me, that includes you, that includes most people we talk to. That doesn't mean that you're all damned. It means you need to go through the struggle, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and that's, I think a good and fitting reflection on entering into the new year. It's like, you know, successes and failures of the year. Well, yeah, there are a lot of things to think of. I don't talk about my personal life on air and will not and shall not.
Yep.
However, things in my job and things like that, I made decisions. Some worked out, some did not. Some were good, some were bad, right? And
Yep.
I will need to reflect on that later. And I'm not entirely satisfied with everywhere that I have ended and everywhere uh and where I've ended up. And but the flip side of this is just because I'm not completely happy with where everything has with everything that's happened and where my life is doesn't mean that I think that everything is a failure per se, right?
Yes.
Like the flip side of this is I still trust in God. That hasn't changed. In that sense, the year is a success, right?
Yes.
Uh, it's a success because okay, a lot of things didn't go the way that I planned, but when did they ever? This life, perhaps God permitted this just such a thing so that had a reminder that this life was not all that there was. Um, and that is good.
Yep.
And as long as I trust in him, then I am confident that things will get better. And even if they don't get better in the here and now, I am confident that God knows what is best and he will ensure that things go in that way.
Yep.
That's really the only thing that we can do, right?
Yep. I.
There is no better, there is no worse. We can try, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't. In fact, you very much should. In fact, it's kind of my point. We're all stuck in the struggle,
Yes.
right? Continue the struggle, but let's not forget that we're struggling towards that good end.
Yes. It's more complicated than simple, did I receive pleasure in this life or anything like that. It's entirely based on God's own standards. I cannot comprehend what God meant, by my brother's death, but perhaps with how things are going, there are hidden blessings that have been that will be received and perceived. And I do believe that sometimes there's no blessing really except the exercise of faith. Because let me tell you, watching your brother die on the bed does force a man to pray, um, even if, shall we say, not calmly. Uh, it also does, deeply remind people that there's the benefits of being a Christian is not what we, consider, right? Like, uh, it's like there's good things to being a Christian, but the idea that it's all sunshine and rainbows simply doesn't exist. Like Anthony has said, there it is a struggle, and it is to fight things and whatnot, uh, to push yourself beyond it, to seek God, who is always reaching out to you, is the battle worth fighting. Then there's work and stuff like that we've done over the year. I'm pretty proud of what's been done for Mother Morrow, and I'm pretty proud of the finale for season two, Pinkerton's Ghosts. Uh,
Mm.
like and I've seen some of the season three stuff you guys have been writing, and it's been pretty great. I think season three ahead will be absolutely fantastic. Uh, Driven in a great way by certain things. Not that I really want to spoil anything right now. Uh, but things like Hawkwood's Golem, Rage Against the Night, uh, Hector in Hell, Due to the Dead, Violet, Snow Wasset, and other episodes, I think really do show the best of what we can do as writers. Um, no novels that we can really point to show for. But I think we both have projects in the works that people should be excited for in the year ahead. Lord willing.
Hmm.
And it's
Oh, hey, I just realized was not working. Can you hear me better now?
I can hear you better now. Let
Woohoo!
me let me
Hope it
just make
wasn't too bad.
it's
Yeah, whatever. Uh, it's fine. It's fine.
fine. Don't worry about it. Uh yeah. I've got two more episodes to write for Mother Morrow. And then we have four episodes to record, which will probably start getting done after the new year. Um, I mean, by definition, it has to be after the new year. And I'm kind of hoping we can get back to that weekly
Okay.
format we started with, but we'll see how things go.
We'll see. Yeah, it's. How about just that? We'll see.
Yeah, I know.
Nothing else said. Let's see. Other things to talk about on the year.
Mm.
Let's see. Hollywood review of the year. Man, was Hollywood bad. Uh,
I think I only saw The Boy and the Heron in theaters, or How Do
so
You
I saw a
Live?
few movies. Yeah, I saw a few movies in theaters. I saw let's see, the only Hollywood film that I saw this year, come to think of it, was The Merchant of Venice with Kenneth Branagh as Hercule Poirot. I like Poirot. Uh, the Merchant of Venice movie was really, in many ways, just like the ultimate in the Hollywood production. It was well made, it was well acted, it was well cast. It wasn't a bad mystery. Uh, in terms, it was completely different from the story it was based on, which was an Agatha Christie book called Halloween Party, which had a much more convoluted plot. But not, it wasn't a bad plot. It worked for what it was. Uh, my
Mm.
big problem with it was what it did to Poirot. So Poirot in Agatha Christie's books, his religion is never talked about, but he's Belgian and is heavily implied Catholic, right?
Right.
Like if it's ever mentioned, it's mentioned like in passing as, he prays or something, right? And
Yes.
indeed, actually, in the David Suchet series, so David Suchet, if you've never heard of that series, it was a adaptation of Agatha Christie where David Suchet, an actor, played Poirot. He is the definitive Hercule Poirot in the same way that people talk about like Jeremy Brett and Basil Rathbone as like the definitive Sherlock Holmes. David Suchet is Poirot. Uh,
Yes.
I'm an Agatha Christie fan. I'm a Poirot fan. I'm not a massive one. I haven't read all of her stuff, but I like her.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, David Suchet's Poirot is absolutely the definitive Poirot. Kenneth Branagh's Poirot is absolutely nothing like him. Doesn't look like him. Barely acts like him. Uh, and notably, at the beginning of it, they give Poirot. So Poirot. Now you might have forgotten this, but Poirot is very smart. And if you didn't know this, smart people are atheists. This is just facts. Uh, this is how you know someone's smart. If they're
Of
not an
course.
atheist, they're not a smart person. Uh, so Poirot is an atheist, and not only is Poirot an atheist, he doesn't believe in ghosts or any of that mumbo jumbo. Obviously, smart people don't. You know, uh, Poirot also doesn't believe in abstract things. He actually has a line where he goes, "I wish all of this stuff was true because then I could believe in justice." So I just want to point out to you that Kenneth Branagh's Hercule Poirot does not believe in justice,
Right.
which
So
that
what's
is
the
a
point?
stunning. That's a stunning thing for to come out of Hercule Poirot's mouth. Uh,
That's like the
like,
only reason to be a detective is to seek justice.
are you serious? Like, Hercule Poirot does not believe in justice.
Yes.
Really, really. Okay.
He has
Uh,
absolutely
that
no reason for anything that he's doing.
yeah, he just doesn't. I guess he's like Doctor House. He likes the puzzle. You know,
Yeah.
except that that's not Hercule Poirot's personality at all. Uh,
So you just hang around places for people to murder because you like, uncovering the
yeah.
murders for its own sake? Yeah, that's right.
Well, what you don't understand is that this Hercule Poirot is a traumatized World War One veteran. Because he needs a tragic backstory. He can't just have wanted to be a detective and then become a detective.
Right.
Uh,
He couldn't
like
have a sense of justice, if you will.
no, justice doesn't exist. Uh, what's funny is that in the movie they make it so that's like he says this, but then it turns out at the end there might have been a real ghost, so maybe he was wrong. But that's like besides the point. The fact that Hercule Poirot says he doesn't believe in justice is just like such an unbelievable misunderstanding of the character. Like it kind of blows your mind.
Yep.
Like like how do you get the character that wrong? Uh it's an okay movie. I do not recommend it if especially not if you like Agatha Christie. Uh like it really it's just not a good portrayal of Poirot. It was a really weird line. That's the one Hollywood movie I saw in theaters this year. I did see a few non-Hollywood stuff. Did the Chosen season 3 come out this year, like at the beginning of the year?
I think so. I
Yeah,
know
if it did,
episodes coming out.
I saw that in theaters this year and it was very good. Uh I am on the record as despite the controversy surrounding it sometimes and I'm convinced the controversies only swirl because it's about Jesus and don't get me wrong, there is a certain appropriateness to that. Like that is
Yes.
where controversy should swirl, but at the same time, like I really don't think it's done anything to deserve it. Uh, like, and I thought that the season 3 finale was absolutely fantastic. I saw that in theaters. I saw the a few of the Miyazaki films. They do every year. They do something they call Ghibli Fest, where they air some Miyazaki's films in theaters, and I always go and see them. Uh, a couple a year. I think I saw Nausicaa and I saw Howl's Moving Castle. That was fun. I'd do that again. Uh, and I saw in December. I saw 3 movies. I saw The Boy and the Heron. I saw The Shift, and I saw Godzilla -1. And The Boy and the Heron was terrific. The Shift was pretty good. I liked it. Talked about it before. And Godzilla Minus One was absolutely fantastic. Like the best movie that I have seen in years, or at least the most entertaining. Uh, we discussed this last week a little bit with The Boy and the Heron, where I said, like, is it better than The Boy and the Heron? Well, no. Uh, it's not. Did I enjoy watching it as much or more than The Boy and the Heron? Yes. I am very happy to report that all of the people who I have convinced to watch it have loved it as much as I have. Ben, you really should see it. Uh, it is a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant movie. It is an incredibly masculine movie, is the way I would describe it. Like, is about men dealing with masculine problems in a masculine way. Uh, and the really notable thing about this in comparison to modern Hollywood is that they are not criticized for being men, right? Or dealing with it as men. You know, there is no criticism of them as men. And the two major female characters in the film have incredibly feminine roles. They are very important characters. They drive the story in significant ways. They have a lot of agency even, but they're feminine in what they do. And not
Yeah.
in like, sometimes you see it in like pulp discussions, Jeffro will be like, "Well, I don't think that Emma Peel in the Avengers, I'm talking about like the '60s spy show, is really feminine because she doesn't fit like." No, these are no debate. There's no controversy. If I were to call them feminine, I am convinced that Jeffro would agree with me. Like the role, so the main female love interest in the movie, the role that she fulfills is she cares for a child. She supports the main lead. She has a lot of agency. Like she chooses to put herself in these positions, She chooses to go out of her way to help him. She chooses to go out of her way to be with him, to go out of her way to help this child who's not her child, right? Like she's a child that was handed off to her. Uh, but it's very feminine. And he has a neighbor whose children all died in the war, but then she starts to help them take care of this child again. And again, it's like it's not that she has no agency. She chooses to help them. She actually originally was not going to and changes her mind and goes back to help them. But she does it in a very, very feminine way, right?
Yes.
Like it is a distinctly feminine role. Just like uh it is a distinctly every other character, there is a distinctly masculine role, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the main character. I mentioned this, like, there is a joke here, but there's also a serious point where it's like he deals with trauma in a very masculine way. He has PTSD, from being a kamikaze pilot. And it's like therapy, talking it out, whatever, none of that would have helped him.
Yep.
Right? Like, it might help a woman to talk through it, to do all of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
But it would not help him. You know what would help him? Getting in a plane and blowing up the personification of his guilt. Like, yeah, men would literally rather fight Godzilla than go to therapy. Uh,
Hey, I mean, yeah, I would too, but
yes. Uh, but there's a truth there, right? Like,
yeah.
in order for him to deal with his trauma, with his problems, he needs to go out and actively do something to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
And that is what he does. Uh, and that's what the movie is about. And, you know, it just, like, what struck me about it, too, on the rewatch was seeing the scene of everybody gathering together, coming up with the plan to take out Godzilla. This is a classic scene in every Godzilla movie. Well, not every, but you know what I mean, right?
Right.
Uh, it's a classic monster movie scene. The movie's characters come together and come up with the plan to defeat the monster, right? Very actually remind me of Jaws, which is not surprising because the movie is said to have been heavily inspired by Jaws, which makes a lot of sense. But It's a classic monster movie scene. You got to have the characters gather together and come up with the plan to defeat the monster. What struck me about the scene was that there were in the rewatch was that there were no women in it. Women did
Ooh,
not show up to this meeting, right?
that's a
Like
pretty good
they just
movie.
didn't go.
Yeah,
What was that?
that's a pretty good movie.
I mean, there's again, it's like there's a joke here where it's like, no women's great idea, but there's also a level of truth here, and that's
Yes,
like the movie was it did something Hollywood wouldn't do, right? Uh, Hollywood would never have that scene with no women. It just
yes,
wouldn't.
it's
You
true.
know, they would add a woman, and maybe they would, depending on the movie, maybe they could add the woman in a better or worse way, right? Like in a way that made more sense or a way that made less sense. But they would have the movie, they would add a woman. Godzilla minus one felt no need to do that, right? Uh, it said there is no reason for women to be in this scene, so we're not going. So why would we add them? We're not going to, and they don't, and that's just how it is. You know, uh, it's a scene full of former Navy veterans who have all come together to figure out a plan to try and stop the monster. Women are not part of this group. They are not going to be part of the team that takes down Godzilla. So they don't go to the meeting, and that's just how it goes.
Yay!
Uh, Absolutely great movie. I loved it. I hope you watch it so that we can have a full show on it one day. Uh, because like, I think it's like the only movie that I have ever seen in theaters more than once. Now that I think about it, at least in its first run, right?
Yeah,
I don't think I've ever seen another movie more than once than Godzilla minus one. Uh, Now, one thing you might notice of the three things that I watched this year or this December, The Boy and the Heron, Godzilla minus one, and The Shift, none of them were made by Hollywood. So that's notable. I don't follow the Hollywood movies. However, I do follow a lot of like the right leaning reviewers. I don't mean the cringe ones. I mean the based ones.
right.
Yeah, Critical Drinker, right? Uh, and his crew,
Yep.
right? The Critical Drinker and his crew. Uh, and they have been talking about the movies, right?
Yeah.
And from what I can tell, the MCU absolutely imploded, like epically. I have heard that Guardians 3 was pretty good, and to be fair, I will probably watch it one day. Uh
Hmm.
and I'll probably enjoy it, I'm sure. I think the Guardians movies are pretty good. But that was it. Like it.
Yeah.
Nothing else was worth watching. I heard like they were all just abysmally terrible. And we discussed this a few weeks ago. Disney is going to die. Disney is going to die. It's going to I don't know exactly what form it will take, like how it will look, but it cannot continue to exist the way that it currently does. It just can't. Right? Like you don't lose this much money in this short a period of time and just continue like nothing happened. Uh, I would not be surprised if we see like Apple is there. There have been some rumors that Apple was going to buy it. I wouldn't be shocked if that happened. Uh, to be honest with you, like Apple buying Disney does make some sense.
I mean,
Uh,
but the thing is that like how many companies can buy Disney? But the thing is, like Disney owns, like I'm I couldn't tell you, but except for some like military contractors like Lockheed Martin, like what company has the walking around cash to buy Disney? Like it's
Apple,
yeah, exactly.
yeah,
But
and that's the rumor.
even then, it's not going to solve anything. Apple is not
Oh no,
based like it's. I don't actually know what the purpose is of people even talking about it, except as a weird kind of trivia thing, because then Apple will own Fox and quite a few other companies that have been bought up by Disney so that they can skin suit them and give them the old Buffalo
Well,
Bill
it's
treatment.
notable in seeing like Disney go from something this massive behemoth to dead, basically, right?
Sure.
Uh, the other thing too, I did visit the parks this year. I had fun. I enjoyed it. I'm not gonna pretend I didn't.
Yeah.
Sorry. Parks are still fun. Uh, of course, the thing about the parks is that they are the hardest things to converge, believe it or not, because of the nature of the business. Like it, I'm trying to think of how to put it. Uh, it makes it very difficult to converge the parks because of how they have to be run.
I I've seen some pretty gay stuff coming out of there.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not saying that that they haven't been converged. I'm saying it gets harder. It's harder to converge them completely. Uh,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean they can't be. They absolutely can, and they will be. Uh, like let me be very clear. Uh,
No, they are. Like I'm saying that they are now totally converged.
I wouldn't say totally.
Okay. I mean, they've got like male princesses and all that stuff. Like it's
The thing is that all of that stuff that makes the news, it's very, very bad, and it's going to get worse. Like, I don't mean to defend it in the sense of like, oh, there's nothing to see here. Whistling, you're right. These are all. However, at this point in the parks, like, those are all still like signs of things to come more than things that have constantly infected the parks. It's. Let me put it to you another way. You could go to the park and see none of this stuff. I know because I did, right? The most I
sure.
saw were some, rainbow murals on the walls. Uh, you can't do that with Disney Hollywood. It's all over everything there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, with that said, the parks are going to go down and they're starting. The one notable thing is that all of the signs that you would get of the parks having a problems, like I'm trying to think of how to put it. They're all very subtle. So we were there 5 years ago as a family, and then me and my siblings went there this year, and it's like, oh, we had pretty much just as good of a time this year as we did 5 years ago. But lots of subtle changes. For example, we went in November last time as a family. When my siblings and I went, we went in July. Now, I said, I don't get it. It still looks just as crowded as it did in November. But then I thought for a moment. I said, wait a minute. It looks as crowded now in July as it did or in the end of June, early July or something, right? As it did in November. That is a really bad sign for Disney, right? Like
Yeah.
that the November dead season relative to Disney, and the end of June, early July peak season are just as crowded. Yeah, that's not good for them. Uh, and there are other like subtle signs. If you go around, like the fact that this was the thing. I watched a whole video on this. It was fascinating, and I saw both. I ended up by complete chance seeing both versions of the show. They had a Finding Nemo musical, uh, full complete musical that was like written by the people who did Avenue Q. Like really big name guys wrote this musical, and it's pretty good, honestly, for a Parks musical. Uh, I happened to see the original version of it because we were there 5 years ago, and the remade version. The remade version that came out post COVID is much worse. Uh, right, like they cut out tons of it, they shortened it. It makes less sense. It's not as good. Just stuff like that. There is a famous show in Disney Hollywood Studios called the Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular. It is absolutely my favorite show in the park. I loved it when I went there years ago. I made sure to go again. It's still a good show, right? It's still very entertaining, but it's worse now. It's worse now because after COVID, they used to have volunteers from the audience come up in during the show, and they would put them in like an Indiana Jones scene. Very cool, very fun. Uh, you go there now, that's gone. I assume that happened during COVID, and they never went back. And the reason they never went back, I would assume, this is just me speculating, but it seems accurate to me. Like, I would be surprised if this wasn't why. I assume is that nobody really complained because it was during COVID. And since nobody complained, it was an easier show for them to do without bringing people up from the audience with less chance of liability. And nobody seemed bothered by it. So why bring it back? Right? Like, there's no real reason to.
Yep.
Uh, which, of course, that's right on a purely nuts and bolts level. The only reason you would bring it back is because it's better that way. But what do they care about that, right? Uh, these are all like in the realm of nitpick. You know, when it all comes down to it. The biggest change is the fact that they got rid of Fast Pass and replaced it with an absolutely horrendous system called the Genie system, which is uh like five. I'm not exaggerating when I say like 5 times as expensive as the Fast Pass system, and does not work as well. Like absolute disaster of a system. Everyone hates it. But in the end, these are even that like these are all still nitpicks for an experience at Disney World, right? But they're all signs. It's like it's all over. Everything in the park is just slowly turning just a little bit worse. And Disney can't afford to let those parks slip because, as everybody tells you, the parks, relative to the movies, require little overhead and make bank, right? Once you build a ride, the ride is built. Yes, there's maintenance. Yes, there's all of taxes and whatever. But in the grand scheme of
Oh,
things,
don't worry
right?
about taxes. Yep.
Yeah, I know. Uh, in the grand scheme of things, it's really not going to be that expensive for them to upkeep the parks compared to the amount of overhead that costs to make a single movie, right?
True.
Especially these multi-million-dollar monstrosities that are out there. So the parks, as everybody has said, oh, the parks keep Disney afloat. Well, all of these little changes add up.
Yep.
Then, like I said, the biggest thing, the thing that is the most alarming if you are the Disney Corporation, is that it was just as crowded when we went during peak season as 5 years earlier when we went in November. That is a really bad sign for Disney.
Yep.
Uh, and one I am happy to say I hope continues. Yeah, my relationship with Disney is I enjoy going, but if it went out of business tomorrow, I would celebrate. Uh, I would celebrate, and I wouldn't even feel conflicted about it, to be honest with you. Uh, Disney needs to die.
Yep.
If I
No.
had to make a yeah, my sorry, I'll finish and then you can go. My big predictions for 2024, number 1, I think that by the end of the year Disney Plus will be shut down.
Ooh.
It bleeds money. It absolutely bleeds money. It has never made a profit or come close to making a profit. Disney Plus can't last. It's going to shut down.
All
And
right.
number 2, I think I would not be surprised if within this is a very long term prediction, I know, but these things don't happen overnight. Within the next 20 years, I wouldn't be surprised if Animal Kingdom shut down because it makes the least money and costs the most to run.
Oh, like the part of the parks that's the zoo.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's a zoo. Zoos are very expensive. You need to pay for the upkeep of the animals. You can't open as late and you can't or as early because you need to feed the animals, right?
Yeah.
It makes the least money and it costs the most. So I would not be surprised if Animal Kingdom was shut down. And that would make me a little bit disappointed because I think Animal Kingdom is great. But you can't like Disney can't keep bleeding money like this. They're gonna need to make cuts, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't build forever.
Yeah. I mean, there's. I don't really have a bone in this game just because it's like it's Disney. I don't think I've watched a Disney film in its entirety anyway for years and eons. Uh, I can't even remember the last time like what my newest Disney film would be. Uh, though I could stand to watch Atlantis: The Lost Empire again. That's actually pretty good. But so it's like my investment in it. I think I saw I just threw that run away. I think I saw the first season of Mandalorian with the family. Um, but I just don't care. Like I can't even get angry about it. It's like, yeah, I got nothing. They made the content. It's now out in the ether, and yeah, that's it. That's all it is. You know, uh, I got no comments. I hope it dies. I think uh, I think you're a little genuine. Uh, you're a little too generous for Disney Plus. I think they'll just absorb it back into Netflix, like they were before they tried to start their own service,
So you think like it'll just rejoin Netflix?
or something similar. Apple TV, if they merge
Oh,
with
sure.
Apple.
Yeah, but it won't exist as its own streaming service.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that mostly. I just think that it's not like they're going to shut it down, lads. They're going to
No, but they won't be
absorb it
able to
into there.
upkeep it on its own, right? Like,
Yeah.
and because it. Here's the other thing. Like, my sister has pointed this out, and she's right. The thing about streaming is that you want to know the real reason Hollywood's in such bad shape today. Uh, it's that streaming makes no money.
Yep.
It is an unbelievably bad. It has like unbelievably awful profit margins.
Yep.
Like to the point where it is so blindingly stupid that they went this route. It makes you wonder, like, what was going on? What were they thinking?
Cheap
You know,
loans.
yeah, that's the
Like,
thing. I follow. There's a guy called Million Dollar. I think he's called Million Dollar Baby. Can't remember. Just a YouTuber, but he's pointed this out where he goes, "You really want to understand everything that's going on and why none of it's going to change? Look at who's funding these movies. It's banks, right?
yep.
And the thing about these banks that the banks aren't going to go bankrupt, and right, they have an infinite amount of money, and what they want is what Disney and all of these companies will do. If they want woke, they get woke, right?
Yep.
That's why none of it will change. Uh, but like I said, the flip side of this is you can't bleed this money forever. You know,
Yeah.
this is why I've talked about it with like in regards to Vox Day and whatever. Everybody believes that the way things are is just gonna last, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
You see it with older generations as well when you talk to Gen Xers and boomers, right? Uh
Mhm.
they have this impression of like, yeah, they say the economy will go bad, but they always predict a depression. They always predict this, they always predict that. And then you sometimes see like, well, liberalism is very good at sustaining itself. All of this is true to an extent.
Yeah.
But the flip side is you're looking at it then from a very historically I don't know, narrow level. Like none of this stuff lasts. It doesn't last,
Yeah.
right? Uh and this idea that you can't get into another world war, you can't get into another depression. It's way too myopic to me, right? That
Yeah.
like, oh,
I
you're
mean,
the
we're
big
in one right
disaster.
now. Like, I don't know what
Yeah,
people are doing, but my money's worth less and less every year. I'm seeing the stuff in Ukraine and Palestine and other places. It's hmm,
and this is why you also see there's a little bit of cope, and not to be mean to our comments, but I see it in their comments as well of people who are like, oh, if you think it's a collapse, it's too optimistic, and it's like, no, mm, sorry, I reject that viewpoint. I'm not being optimistic if I predict a collapse. You don't want it, right? Like people who say that you want it, you don't understand what it's like, right?
yep,
You don't want it. Uh,
yeah,
it's the same thing of being like, you want a civil war or whatever. No, you don't.
no,
You absolutely do not. It would be horrendous.
yep.
Uh, could the right win it? Yes, I think potentially. At least in theory. Uh, but you don't want it,
And quite
right? It would be
frankly,
better.
I believe in the theory that The Summer of Love, Summer of Peace, the Summer of Floyd, was a civil war, and one side didn't show up, and so the other side won. Uh,
There's a sense in which that's true.
and it's like people want to talk big about things or that they've got a plan. It's like no, the only plan that matters is clearing out the old and making way for the new. And quite frankly, nobody talking about it is there to be an elite. Maybe guys like Elon Musk and other places have the money, just the money, nothing else, to be quote unquote elite afterwards. But it's like no, the let's take the Roman Empire falling, right? You had a very civil war, a very civil war happy elite who constantly fought each other so that they could reach the godhood of being an emperor. But then you have people coming in. The common Goth soldier was never really promoted up to warlord. All of the guys who ruled, like Alaric and others, Goths and other kingdoms, were almost always the sons and children of chieftains, or were groomed by Romans to be leaders of their people. Even though they soon developed into their own thing, there's a clear heritage of even, direct Roman tutelage and education before they took their respective thrones. So to me, it's like there's things we're looking out for, but quite frankly, there's only a handful of people who could qualify for it, and even then, things like Javier Milei, which we could see as a victory for our side over the enemy, still, it still doesn't taste right. Still doesn't feel like anything new. He feels like he's doing away with some of the old, sure, but he doesn't feel like something that's new. He just feels like something that's old, that's more what we want than what we don't want.
Yeah, the other thing too is like to be clear, I've made my peace with and will probably be voting for Trump. I assume he's going to be on the ballot. I don't think they'll be able to keep him away, to be honest with you. Uh, but make no mistake, I don't see Trump as a savior, and I don't think that his first term was flawless. We've rehashed this time and time again, but I think it's good to bring it up at a year-end stream, right? In terms of Trump, I think that he had a very good first. He had a good overall first term that was interrupted by what was essentially a black swan event in COVID, which was an unprecedented level psyop on the entire American population. Trump fumbled his handling of COVID. I have heard and still do not agree with the people who try and argue that he handled it well. He did not. With that said, while I don't think he handled it well, I also don't think that he handled it as disastrously badly as pretty much anybody else would have. And I also can't really blame him for not dealing with an unprecedented worldwide psyop well, like as much as I could have necessarily, So I think he did an overall good job. I will be voting for him again for that reason. Because on balance, considering the promises he made and the promises he kept, versus how I think other people would do, I don't see anybody else doing better than Donald Trump. Right? Furthermore, at the very least, he has been making the right sorts of promises. That doesn't mean that he'll keep them, but nobody else really is even making those sorts of promises. Also, I will not vote for VTech. Uh,
Same here. I'm not
I
a
won't do it.
fan of, sorry, I'm not a fan of Indian supremacy in any way, shape, or form. And these guys are gunning for it. I don't know. It's one of those things that I can go up to people and go, "You're not blind to this, right?" Like the ruler of England is the prime minister of England is Indian, the Hindu Indian, the Ireland, and all these other places. And it's like you see this, right? And
I
it's
think
like
VTech would make a very good vice president. Uh,
he would
that yeah,
unironically he would become president because the president would randomly die. Uh,
eh,
I'm not saying he'd do it himself. I'm just saying somebody would arrange it for him.
eh. Either way. Uh, not my point though. Like
Sure.
my point being that will vote for Trump. With that
Yes.
said, I don't do it with I do it with that understanding. Trump was flawed, made a lot of mistakes, but did better than probably anybody else would have in that position, and better than I expected him to do, frankly.
Hmm.
So given all of those parameters, yeah, I think that he has earned. Also, I do think that he at the very least there are enough anomalies that make me think that it is quite possible that he should have won the last election. I am not entirely convinced it was stolen in the sense of fraud. Uh sorry, John C. Wright, I love you. Uh
I mean, I don't see how you can say that, but like,
because I've never really seen a convincing presentation that, like, oh, if these votes were added in, it definitely would have meant that he won. If anything, what I have seen is, hey, there are discrepancies in these various states that, if you look into it, might end up turning the tide of those states. The thing is that because people have tried to prevent us from looking into it, we never actually have, so we don't actually
right.
know. Uh, and we and so I think it's very possible that the election was stolen, but I don't think it's proven. Uh, I also don't think it really matters because, yeah,
I just don't think a judge is willing to die for it.
that's true too. Yeah, I think you're right about that. Uh,
We're still talking. So, like, here's the thing, like, end of the year stuff and whatnot. But quite frankly, this stuff's all been a holding pattern since like 2020. Uh, and I don't know. Like, all I know is that a lot of these issues seem to be the same issues from like 2020 and stuff like that. And I've got no real way of dealing with it. Like the only thing I can think of that's like unique to this year is like me moving to a new apartment, but I did that last year with my brother. So it's like, okay, so the only thing that's changed materially, besides what names are on the theater marquee, is that my brother's dead. And everything else is just kind of like, yeah, no, same old politics, same old this, same old that, you
hmm.
know. And it's I don't care for it. I don't care for it. I don't wanna worry about this stuff. We've had the same sort of political issues for the last who knows how many years. 3 years. But quite frankly, Trump only delayed what was going to happen. Um, so it's like I can't even say that it's new political issues in the sense of since 2020 or whatever, because it's like yeah, Obama was going for it, and nobody can say that George Bush wasn't a rhino. He wasn't conservative. Um, well, he was conservative, but it's like nothing ever changes, nothing ever happens. It's like we're just rehashing the same stuff since 2023, and there's nothing we can really do about it. Sorry, 2020 and 2023, and there's nothing we can really do about it
Yeah,
because
you're right.
2024 is just going to be more of the same, and it's going to be more of the same stuff from um, more of the same stuff from the Democrats, from the different things. It's just tiresome.
Yeah, and I guess this goes to like, so what's going to change, about our lives in 2024? Well, the only thing we can change is ourselves. And this
Yep.
goes back to what we said earlier. What's going to change is the struggle, right? That we're going to keep on keeping on. I still have my goals that I'm going to be grinding towards. I might have to make some major decisions in my career. Uh, I might have some major changes coming in my life, or maybe I won't, and maybe things won't change as much as I want to. And you want to know something? Either way, that's okay. Uh,
Yep.
things don't happen at the pace that I choose. I am not the one in charge. Uh, sometimes I do need to make decisions, and some of those decisions, but there is a certain freedom, as we've discussed before, in knowing that no matter how we mess our decisions up, God is the one in control, right?
Yep.
Like, there's a freedom to that. in, I don't know, just sort of realizing that uh at the end of all of this, it's like, oh man, you got this really major decision to make, like with your job or something, right? Like, are you going to quit and do something else? Are you going to keep at it? Are you going to ask for a promotion? Are you going to, right, move or whatever? And then go, but there's so many things that could go wrong or could go right. And then you pause and then you go, I can only do the best that I can do, right? I
Yep.
have my own human limitations. God is going to watch out for me either way, and it's His will.
Yep.
So you follow the what we'll call the Father Augustine Weta decision making process to pray, think, act. Right?
Yep.
You pray, or think, pray, act. I believe was the order. You think it over, you pray, and then you make your decision, and then you trust that. Like I've kind of stopped since I have become more religious, which happened relatively recently in my life. And by relatively recently, I mean within less than 10 years, 2018, right? Uh, I have a specific, what Protestants might consider like a born again date. Uh, and I am happy to appropriate that language. Uh, right? Like in Ash Wednesday of 2018, is when I decided I was going to, refigure how I thought about my life. And in that time, I've sort of tried to stop thinking of things in terms, and I sort of have stopped thinking about things in terms of good and bad decisions, right?
Yep.
Like, you know, is this the. There are multiple ways things can work out, and there are multiple ways things can fail. And in many ways, what looks like failure or success in the moment is not necessarily the same thing in the eyes of God, right? You try
Yeah.
this new endeavor, you failed, it didn't work out. It still might have been where God needed you or wanted you to be at that time. Uh,
Yep.
right? Just because you didn't accomplish what you wanted. And the flip side is you do something, it does work out. Uh, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's where your story needs to end, that you're exactly where you have to be and you should stop. God might want you to do something else or do something more or continue striving, and you should always continue striving. You're balancing that Christian ideal of like the Ecclesiastes vanity, all is vanity, which, well, yes, but we're in a world that is run by the Almighty God, where He is our Lord and Savior, and He is the
Yep.
one in charge. And in that sense, I am always striving for more,
Yep.
for His sake, if not mine. Right? Like, I am always striving to do greater and better things, and I might die not having accomplished any of it, but it's not going to be because I decided to be content with the mediocre.
Yes. It's something that I really like about the crowd I'm surrounding myself with now is that I'm surrounded by people who are not content, and I mean that in all the best ways. Uh, because what it means is that people who are not content with their shall we say uh, horrible choices, I guess, or whatever. Like it's people who are going to strive both for God and for other things, depending on whether they're Christian or not. And I think that's a good sort of good thought pattern to take into 2024. There are a lot of things we can't control, and there are a lot of people online who say we can control them or that something we'll do matters. But quite frankly, nothing we do matters. The ruler is in the hands of God, not in the hands of internet posters. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and there's not much we can do about it except pray and keep our powder dry. And well as in general, just sort of making sure that we're living a life pleasing to God, and not just pleasing to ourselves or to whatever else happens to be uh, in power over us. Um, it's difficult to it's difficult to accept because there's a certain amount of passivity that you have to, sort of be willing to live. You do have to be willing to let God do his thing. And that's not very pleasing all the time because it means submitting ourselves to his will and not to our own will. Um, but at the same time, I'm not one of those guys who like, oh, you have to be, perfectly humble in the way the world describes for Christians. It's like, no, I know what this game is. I don't want to play it. I'm proud of what I've done for Pinkerton's Ghosts. I'm proud of how well my family handled my brother's death, and I'm proud that I'm much more successful than I've been in previous years. And I hope God brings more to me as things go, and that I am a good steward of everything He has. But I'm not going to worry about it. Uh, I'm going to do my best, and then we'll see how things turn out. Uh, I will seek the Lord's will in all things, and I'm going to uh, not worry about what things like the world wants and stuff like that. Because all they want is to feed their pleasures, feed their faces, and to drunkenly stumble over the sidewalk, where I have just kicked them out to. Because that is the cost of the world that people don't want to always bring up.
Yeah, let me go through the chat before. I think that having a short stream today is okay. What do you think?
I'm fine with it. I'm not feeling well anyway, and quite frankly,
That's
I've got a lot of things to think about going forward. And even though I'm going to be, seeking the Lord's will, I'm going to be having some job stuff coming up. Um, you know, when you're at a job that you have difficulties with, sometimes you can handle the dysfunction, and other times you just can't. And I'm getting to the point where I just can't handle it anymore, and I'm gonna have an anger reaction if I have to listen to one more contradictory order. But here's the thing: like this is what I was reminded of today at church by one brother Ron, and that is in the mundane things. We don't do it for men or for our masters or for our paymasters or whatever you want to say. We do these things as to the Lord, and that's what God expects of us. Not to men, not for that paycheck, and not for the fickle opinions of humans who think themselves gods, even if they wouldn't say it in that way. Yeah, that's what I got.
going through and very good. Going through comments, JD Cohen says, "Wow, this is in response to way earlier when I said that in the new Hercule Poirot movie with Kenneth Branagh, Hercule Poirot said he did not believe in justice.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
that is a wow moment.
I'm still kind of shocked because it's like, again, what's the point of being a, what's the point of being a detective if you're not doing it for justice? Like,
Yeah,
it's
absolutely bizarre.
it's yeah.
Uh, and never forget that Sherlock Holmes is actually intensely religious in the stories. Uh, that's another thing too. That is, especially like modern Sherlock Holmes, like Sherlock with Benedict Cumberbatch and whatever, got
Oh yeah.
very, very wrong. One of the most famous lines in any Sherlock Holmes story is when he goes, "Your life is not your own. Keep your hands off it." In the, I'm gonna go on a little tangent here because this is subject that I care about. So in the Benedict Cumberbatch Sherlock Holmes, they include that line, but they add a bunch of context where he basically goes like, "It's an interesting thing, take your life, take it from whom?" Like his idea is that oh, there are lots of different people who you owe, so your life is not your own. You keep your hands off it, right?
Right.
That is not the context that Sherlock Holmes used in the short story. In the short story, the reference was very clear. It was to God,
Mm.
right? So the context of the story is that his client covers her face. She had actually this was a pretty insane story, and it's weird because it was from the case files, and in the case files of Sherlock Holmes, the last book, the stories are not as good. So you get these random interludes, I get, or you get these random moments in the stories that are clearly like Conan Doyle trying to come up with some sort of motivation to write them. They have these intensely memorable moments and like nothing else to recommend them, right? Or ideas or something, you know.
Yes.
And this is the moment, and like your life is not your own, keep your hands off it is a great line. All-time classic Sherlock Holmes line. I love it. I quote it regularly, right? And
Mm-hmm.
however, the story that came before it is incredibly unmemorable, even though it's also insane. But Conan Doyle clearly didn't really care much about it. It was like about some sort of circus accident and a lion mauled this woman's face. Which sounds funnier than it was. Uh,
I mean,
because
it was
it
a
sounds so
Victorian
great.
circus, so they probably.
Mm. It sounds like it should at least be funny in a this is so insane, it's amusing way, but it really wasn't. It was just kind of boring. Anyway, so the woman wears a veil over her face. And after Holmes says, like, well, I solved the case and whatever, and he says the woman says yes, thank you, and but there was something strange about the way she was acting. And Holmes like grabs her by the arm or like stops her and says, "Your life is not your own. Keep your hands off it." And she turned to him and he's like, and says something along the lines of, "What's the point?" And this is how the conversation continues. And then he's like, there's basically, no reason for me to live, is how she responds to him. And Holmes says, like, how would you know? Maybe just the example of patient suffering is a good reason to stay alive, which is honestly an incredibly mature and ballsy response. And she says, like, could you bear it? And she removes the veil. And Watson says, like, that the sight of her face was so horrible that Holmes just puts his hand up in pity and she walks out. Uh, but then they get something in the mail a few weeks later, and it's a bottle of poison with a note that says, decided to take your advice. So it's a nice ending. Uh,
Yeah.
she doesn't kill herself, but like it is very clear in the story that what Holmes is talking about by your life is not your own, what he means is your life belongs to God. Keep your hands off it.
Yep.
Right? And the Sherlock show recontextualized it to uh your life like belongs to other people, which is
Right.
lame and is also not very convincing, to be honest.
Yeah, and
Uh
it's like from my perspective, that sort of thing is like, you know, okay, well, most people tend to do things that harm me. Therefore, why should I care what they do? It causes me pain. But it's like, if it's to God, it's a different subject whatsoever. It's not then about some sort of weird personal issue. It's instead about the actual matter of heaven, which is quite frankly much more important than some sort of weird cycle of debts. I owe nobody anything, and they owe me nothing. In this, in as described. I guess
mhm.
that's a good way to put it. And I don't mean this in a hard-hearted way that I honor no debts, but I mean it very much in the way of if you say, well, I was nice to you once, or that my presence is, this or that, well, before God, He knows better. I know that I witness to people when I work as a bouncer, and sometimes those people are even sober. Therefore, I understand that my purpose at this time, because these events randomly pop up, is to be there to witness to people. But then I see in other places that, quite frankly, I'm not doing much of anything, and I could probably leave and not cause any ill effects. If your life is full of those things where you can just leave and there's no problems, well, there's no actual debt. Okay, so Sherlock Holmes says this. So that I owe all these people my life, blah blah blah, because of whatever his Benedict Cumberbatch's logic was, or the writers through Benedict Cumberbatch. Okay, so once I bury my mother, father, and sister and have no more relatives and I have no more books in me, what's to stop me from killing myself? Like there's nothing. Like the debts are paid. That's it. I've buried them. Unless I have kids in between then, who refurbish the debts. I don't. You can't. It's. I just hate that logic.
Yeah, no, it's bad.
I'd rather
Uh,
forgive. It's a lot
it's
less
bad,
difficult.
and I want to emphasize that the original story, the line, is much more powerful and much better. Uh, all right, reading through then. Bradford Walker, it doesn't need to last. It just needs to outlast all its enemies. Once it's the last man standing, it can turn around and stop being stupid. That now people talk about me being optimistic. Now that is optimistic.
But they won when the
Uh,
Soviets collapsed.
yeah, yeah. Uh, oh yeah, the Indians are moving throughout the Anglosphere. Yes, and Trump is the best we have at this time. Also, yes. Uh, yeah, we've had the discussion with Trump before. My impression of it was, and still is, that in order to save the republic, quote unquote, what we need is a Cincinnatus or a Washington, and Trump is neither. He is better than I expected him to be, and better, frankly, than many of us deserve.
Bring
But
us
he's
the
still not good
Sola.
enough. Yes, still not good enough. Uh, and yep, Caitlin just dropped in and said, I'm out with my young adult friends watching the ball drop. Very nice. I am going to have cheese sauce as soon as we're finished, and we are about to finish. Anything else to add, Ben?
I'm going to Buffalo Wild Wings even though I'm having gut problems. I am the
That
master of my body. My Gnostic heritage demands that I show mastery of it and punish it for the wickedness it does with hot wings.
so dumb, Ben.
Happy
So dumb. Uh, good night, everyone. Happy New Year.
New
Uh,
Year.
will 2024 be better? Well, that's up to all of you to decide, isn't it?
Oh man, I hope it's a low bar. If it's not better, it's like, oh. All right, have a good night, guys.